During the labor hearing, a 7-year-old girl crosses the room in an oversized blazer, leaves her backpack on the floor, and tells the judge, "I'm my mom's lawyer." No one dares to breathe. What seemed impossible turns into something no one, not even the law, was prepared for. The echo of tiny heels resonated through the marble corridor of the Seville Supreme Court, like the accelerated beating of a nervous heart. It was an April morning, and the golden light filtering through the Gothic windows illuminated an 8-year-old girl walking resolutely towards courtroom number 3. She was wearing a dark blue blazer, too big for her, borrowed from her neighbor Doña Carmen, and a cardboard folder adorned with hand-drawn hearts. "With your permission, sir, I am my mom's lawyer," she clearly announced to the judge, who looked up from his documents with an expression of complete bewilderment. The silence that followed was so profound that one could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Lawyers exchanged glances, the court clerk stopped typing, and in the public gallery, a 35-year-old woman, Isabel Marina, felt the world stop as she watched her daughter, Lucia, walk confidently to the stand like an experienced lawyer. It all began 3 months earlier when Isabel was fired from her job as a cook at the exclusive private school San Patricio in the heart of Seville. The accusations were vague: inappropriate behavior, violation of protocols, incompatibility with the school environment. Empty words that concealed a much more sinister truth. The school principal, Eduardo Herrera, had devised a perfect system of labor exploitation. He hired working-class individuals, mostly immigrant women or single mothers in desperation, on temporary contracts that he renewed every 6 months. During these periods, he demanded unpaid overtime, forced them to perform duties outside their responsibilities, and when someone complained or showed signs of fatigue, he simply did not renew the contract. Isabel was different. After 2 years of silent work, she began to record all the violations. Employees worked 14 hours a day. The kitchen was unsanitary and violated all health regulations. Children fell ill due to spoiled food served to save money. When she finally dared to speak up, Herrera fired her the next day, but Isabel underestimated her daughter. Lucia was an observant girl, the kind who eavesdrops on conversations from the stairs and remembers every word. In the weeks following the dismissal, she watched her mother crumble, whispering on the phone in the bathroom, sleepless at night, her eyes losing their sparkle more and more each day. The public defender assigned to them, a tired man with a pile of cases, explained that they had little chance. "It's your word against theirs, Señora Morena, and they have resources we don't." That's when Lucia made a decision that changed everything. Over 3 weeks, the girl developed a plan that would impress any strategic lawyer. First, she convinced Doña Carmen, her 70-year-old neighbor and former literature teacher, to teach her important terms because she wants to help mommy. Carmen, charmed by the little girl's curiosity, began explaining the basics of justice, labor rights, and court procedures. But Lucia went further. She started her own investigation. She sat in the park across from the school after classes, observing the employees leaving. When she recognized someone who worked with her mother, she approached them with that innocence only children possess. "Excuse me, did you know my mom? She worked in the kitchen at San Patricio School." This is how Lucia learned that Maria Jose, the cleaner, was forced to lie about Isabel's working conditions, that Antonia, the gardener, saw Herrera shouting at female employees, that Rosa, another cook, fell ill from working with expired products, but was afraid to report it for fear of losing her job. The day before the hearing, Lucia told her mother, "Mom, tomorrow I'm going to court with you." "Lucia, sunshine, this is no place for children. Besides, we already know we're going to lose." "We won't lose, Mom. I have evidence." Isabel looked at her daughter with a mixture of tenderness and worry. What evidence could an 8-year-old girl have? Now she stood before Judge Don Alejandro Ruiz, a 50-year-old man known for his strictness, but also his sense of justice. Lucia opened her heart-adorned folder and pulled out a stack of neatly organized papers. There were drawings, letters written in childish handwriting, and something that made the school's lawyer, Roman Vega, jump sharply to his feet. Photographs. Your Honor, Lucia continued with professional seriousness, my mom didn't do anything wrong, but the gentleman from the school, yes, he did bad things to many people. The judge, after a minute of internal deliberation, decided to listen. In his 30-year career, he knew that justice sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Proceed, Señorita Morena, he said, reviewing the papers. Lucia took a deep breath and began to present her investigation with a precision that stunned the entire courtroom. She named names, dates, specific situations, and showed drawings of unsanitary kitchens based on her mother's descriptions. She read out employee testimonies recorded in her school notebook in childish handwriting, but with astonishingly accurate content. But the real bombshell came when she pulled a crumpled envelope from her folder. And I also have this, she said, handing the judge a recording on an old mobile phone. This is Mr. Herrera talking to another person about how to deceive employees. The silence that followed was so thick it seemed to have physical weight. Roman Vega, the school's lawyer, abruptly stood up. Objection, Your Honor. This presentation is inadmissible. You cannot allow a minor... Sit down, counsel, the judge ordered firmly. The minor is exercising her right to be heard as an indirect witness, and, as I see it, she has important information relevant to the case. As the recording played, a conversation between Herrera and a school administrator in which they openly discussed how to silence problematic employees. Lucia looked at her mother. Isabel had tears in her eyes, but for the first time in many months, they were tears of hope. The judge announced a 2-hour recess to examine all the evidence presented by the girl. During this time, something unusual began to happen in the court corridors. The story leaked out. A law student, waiting for his turn to intern, filmed the moment Lucia entered the courtroom and declared herself her mother's lawyer. The video, only 30 seconds long, began to spread on WhatsApp among students, then reached professors, journalists, and finally social networks. By the time the session resumed, a small crowd had gathered in the corridors. Local journalists, Isabel's neighbors, mothers of other students from the school, and some current and former San Patricio employees, inspired by the courage of the 8-year-old girl, decided to come. When the judge returned to the courtroom, his expression had completely changed. Señora Morena, he solemnly announced after reviewing the evidence presented by your representative, this court orders the immediate suspension of your dismissal and the initiation of a comprehensive investigation into the labor practices of San Patricio School. The shout of joy that erupted from the gallery was so spontaneous that the judge had to bang his gavel several times to restore order. But that was only the first victory. Outside the court, Roman Vega was speaking quietly and urgently on the phone with someone. Eduardo Herrera, the school principal, had already received several calls from concerned parents, and on social media, the hashtag #8-year-old lawyer was starting to go viral. Lucia, unaware of the media storm she had unleashed, held her mother's hand tightly as they left the courthouse. Did I do well, Mom? Isabel knelt before her daughter, took her face in her hands, and said, You did perfectly, my love, but it's only just beginning. And she was right. What neither of them knew was that Lucia's small investigation had uncovered something much larger than just a case of unfair dismissal. It exposed the tip of an iceberg of corruption, involving not only San Patricio School, but an entire network of private educational institutions operating under the same exploitation scheme. That evening, as Seville prepared for bed, 3 events were happening simultaneously. Eduardo Herrera was holding an emergency meeting with other private school principals. A group of journalists began investigating similar cases, inspired by Lucia's story. And the girl, in her small room, was writing in her diary with her favorite pen. Today, I helped my mom. Tomorrow, I will help other moms. And have you ever felt that one person, regardless of age, can change the world? Write to us in the comments what city you're from, and if you believe we all deserve justice, and don't forget to subscribe. This story is just beginning. The morning sunbeams broke through the blinds of Lucia's small room when she was woken by the persistent ringing of the phone. It was 6:30 a.m. on a Saturday, and her mother was already awake, speaking in whispers from the kitchen. Yes, I understand. No, we haven't spoken to any journalists. How is this in the newspaper? Lucia crept silently down the hallway to the kitchen and saw her mother with disheveled hair and a panicked expression on her face. On the table lay 3 different newspapers, and all of them had her photo, the moment she left the courthouse the day before. Spain's youngest lawyer, proclaimed El Correo de Andalucía. 8-year-old girl uncovers education scandal, announced Diario de Sevilla. But what shocked Isabel most was the headline in ABC, "The Little Defender Who Stumped the System." "Mom, what happened?" Lucia asked, rubbing her eyes. Isabel hung up, knelt before her daughter, and taking her small hands in hers said, "Sunshine, it seems what you did yesterday turned out to be very important. The whole city is talking about you." "Is that bad?" "No, my love, but it means things we didn't expect will happen." As if to confirm her words, the doorbell began to ring persistently. Then there were knocks and voices from the street, shouting Lucia's name. Isabel went to the window, and what she saw left her speechless. On the sidewalk stood no fewer than 20 people, some with cameras, some with signs, several with flowers and toys for Lucia. "Señora Morena, this is Canal Sur. Can we speak with you? Lucia, you're our hero. We want to meet the little lawyer." At that moment, Doña Carmen appeared at the back door, breathless after hopping over the small fence that separated their yards. "Isabel, darling, it's getting out of hand. You need to get out of here for a few hours." Doña Carmen led them through the back door to her car, avoiding the crowd gathered at the main entrance. As she drove through the cobbled streets of the Triana neighborhood, Isabel received one call after another. Lawyers offered their services for free. Television producers wanted to make a documentary. Politicians promised support, and one publishing house even showed interest in publishing the memoirs of Spain's youngest lawyer. But not all calls were supportive. "Señora Morena," a rough and threatening voice had said the night before, "it would be wise for you and your daughter to lower your profile. There are important people who don't like the scandal you've caused." Isabel didn't tell Lucia about this call, but she couldn't sleep a wink all night. Meanwhile, in an elegant office in the center of Seville, Eduardo Herrera was holding a crisis meeting with 5 directors of other prestigious private schools in the city. In a wooden table, the hardened faces of men accustomed to being in control, but now facing something completely unexpected: an 8-year-old girl publicly exposing their methods. "The situation is still under control," said Roman Vega, the lawyer who represented the school the day before. "But if this escalates, if more employees dare to speak out—" "Then we'll make sure they don't speak," Herrera interrupted coldly. "Most of them have signed confidentiality agreements, and those who don't, well, they still need a job." "Eduardo, you're talking about threats now. That could bring us even more legal problems." "More problems than a little girl exposing our methods on national television? Because that's exactly what will happen if we don't act now." But what Herrera didn't know was that at that very moment, just 3 blocks away, another meeting was taking place in the small apartment of Maria Jose, the cleaner who had once lied about Isabel's working conditions. 6 former employees from different private schools in the city had gathered. Lucia's courage had ignited something in them. "I was also forced to lie," said Rosa, the former cook. "They told me if I didn't sign a false statement against Isabel, I wouldn't get a recommendation for a new job." "And I was forced to work sick during last year's flu outbreak," added Antonio the gardener. "When I asked for a day off to recover, they threatened to fire me." "My children go to public schools because I can't afford private ones," muttered Carmen, another cleaner. "The irony is that I clean schools where my children can never study, while the principals live like kings." Maria Jose, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. I have recordings. All eyes turned to her. For 2 years, I recorded conversations on my phone. First, to protect myself if I was ever accused of something. But then I understood. I understood what was really happening. Her hands trembled as she showed her old smartphone. I have a recording where Herrera admits he specifically hires single mothers because they are more desperate and less problematic. I have conversations about how to avoid health inspections. I even have a recording where they plan to fire employees right before they complete 2 years of work to avoid giving them a permanent contract. The silence that followed her words was heavy, filled with years of humiliation and accumulated fear. "Why didn't you say anything before?" asked Rosa. "And what was I supposed to do?" she replied. "Who would have believed me? But now, after seeing how this little girl found the courage we didn't have, it was Antonio who made the decision that changed everything. We will support Isabel and Lucia and tell the whole truth." The next day, Sunday, Canal Sur's Andalucia Directo aired a special hour-long episode titled "The Little Girl Who Challenged the System." The audience was record-breaking. Over 800,000 viewers, an unusual figure for a regional program. Lucia appeared on air in her best dress, sitting next to her mother on Doña Carmen's sofa. Journalist Elena Vasquez, an experienced woman known for her sensitivity when discussing social issues, conducted the interview with the care a minor deserved. "Lucia, why did you decide to help your mom?" "Because she always tells me that if something is wrong, it needs to be fixed. And what they did to Mom was wrong." "Weren't you scared to speak in front of the judge?" "I was, but I was even more scared that Mom would stay sad." The simplicity of her answer sharply contrasted with the complexity of the case she uncovered, but it was Isabel's words that truly moved the viewers. "My daughter taught me that justice has no age, that when you're right, no matter how small or insignificant you are, the truth will always find a way to come out." The program's effect was immediate. Social media was filled with messages of support, but testimonies from other employees of similar schools also began to pour in. By Monday morning, the public defender's office assigned to Isabel's case already had 15 new complaints, but the most significant reaction came from an unexpected place. Judge Alejandro Ruiz watched the program at home with his wife and teenage daughter. At the end of the broadcast, his daughter said, "Dad, that girl did more for justice in one day than many lawyers do in an entire career." These words echoed in the judge's mind all night. The next day, he made a decision that shook the entire judicial system of Andalusia. He ordered a large-scale investigation not only against San Patricio School, but against the entire system of elite private education in Seville. "This case has revealed possible systematic violations," he declared at an impromptu press conference. "Justice cannot remain deaf when the voice of truth comes from a child's mouth." The news reached Eduardo Herrera while he was having lunch at his private club, a place where the civilian elite gathered to discuss business away from prying ears. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Parents demanded explanations, lawyers warned of potential lawsuits. Business partners expressed concern about their investments. But the call that alarmed him most was from Roman Vega. "Eduardo, you need to understand the seriousness of the situation. We're not just talking about one unfair dismissal. We're talking about an investigation that could uncover a decade of violations. And it's all because you underestimated an 8-year-old girl." That afternoon, after lunch, Herrera made a desperate decision. He called an emergency meeting of the school's administrative board and proposed a strategy that would mark the beginning of the fiercest battle Lucia and Isabel would face. "We will strike back," he announced with a cold smile. "If they want a media war, they'll get one. But we have resources they don't even suspect." What Herrera didn't know was that Lucia, from her bedroom window, had been observing 2 men in suits standing on the street corner and photographing her house for several hours. He also didn't know that Maria Jose had already handed her recordings over to Judge Ruiz. And he certainly didn't know that the 8-year-old little lawyer was already preparing her next move. That night, while Seville slept, Lucia wrote in her diary. The bad man from school is angry. Mom is worried, but Doña Carmen says that when you're right, you can't stop. Tomorrow I will help more moms, just as sad as mine was. At the bottom of the page, she drew a heart with a red crayon and wrote, Justice is stronger than fear. Monday in Seville began with a gray morning. Thick clouds foretold a storm. Lucia woke up before her mother, as she had been doing for the past week, and quietly went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. It had become her own responsibility since she saw Isabel crying one morning, not knowing how to take care of her daughter. As she spread jam on toast, she heard the familiar sound of newspapers being thrown at the door. She ran to get them, hoping to see more positive news about her case, but what she saw made her freeze. Mother uses child for personal revenge, screamed the headline of Andalusia's most influential economic publication. Below it was a photo of Isabel leaving a supermarket with a serious expression, accompanied by an article describing her as a problematic employee with a history of conflicts. But that wasn't the worst part. The next page featured an interview with 3 former colleagues who described Isabel as quarrelsome, deceitful, and manipulative. Lucia didn't recognize any of the names, but the accusations were devastating. Isabel Morena was always problematic, read one anonymous testimony. She constantly complained about everything, created a bad atmosphere among employees, and we saw her taking food home without permission several times. When Isabel woke up and saw the newspapers, her face lost all color. Lucia, sunshine, you need to understand something very important. People will say unpleasant things about us, but that doesn't mean it's true. Why are they lying, Mom? Because when you tell the truth about powerful people, they get angry and try to make you look bad. The phone rang again, but this time it wasn't journalists with positive interview offers. It was people screaming insults, accusing Isabel of using her daughter for money and threatening to teach her a lesson. Eduardo Herrera's strategy was beginning to work. Over the weekend, he had hired one of Madrid's most prestigious public relations agencies, specializing in reputation crisis management. The plan was simple but effective. Discredit Isabel as a mother and employee, present Lucia as a manipulated child, and shift media attention to alleged irregularities in the judicial investigation. Roman Vega coordinated the campaign with military precision. 3 former school employees, fired years ago for various reasons but in need of money, were found and persuaded to give negative testimonies against Isabel in exchange for monetary compensation. A private detective agency investigated the Morena family's financial history in search of any irregularities that could be exaggerated. But the real blow came with the involvement of several conservative media outlets with a carefully constructed narrative. Isabel Morena is an irresponsible mother who trained her daughter to play a role in a scheme designed to get rich quick through a labor lawsuit. It's a touching story, Vega explained to an allied journalist. But if you look closely, do you really believe an 8-year-old girl could have gathered all that evidence herself? Obviously, she's being manipulated. By Tuesday, the narrative had completely changed in many publications. Conservative radio shows discussed the use of children for selfish purposes. Columnists wrote articles about parents sacrificing their children's childhoods for money. Even child psychology experts appeared, warning about the harm media exposure could cause Lucia. The pressure was immense, but it was when the first serious threat came that Isabel realized the true scale of what they were facing. On Wednesday morning, as she accompanied Lucia to school, 2 men approached them on the street. Señora Morena, one of them said, a stocky man in a cheap suit. A client would like to speak with you. Which client? Who are you? Let's just say we represent interests that will benefit if you decide to withdraw your lawsuit and keep your daughter away from the media. I don't understand what you're talking about. Please let us pass. The second man, taller and with an unpleasant smile, blocked her way. My boss is a generous man, Señora Morena. He's willing to offer you significant compensation to make this situation disappear. Quietly. And if I refuse? Well, it would be a shame if something happened to your lovely daughter. Accidents happen, especially when parents aren't careful enough. Lucia, who had been silently holding her mother's hand all this time, looked up at the man who was threatening them. My mom is not bad, she said firmly. And are you the men who were watching our house? I saw you from the window. The girl's accurate observation surprised the men. The taller one knelt to her level. You're a very smart little girl, too smart for your own good. It was at that moment that Doña Carmen appeared, walking towards them with a shopping bag. Isabel, what's going on here? Who are these gentlemen? The men exchanged glances, assessing the situation. Having a witness was not part of their plan. Nothing serious, Grandma, the stockiest one replied sarcastically. We were just having a friendly chat with Señora Morena. Well, it seems you've already had your chat, Doña Carmen replied sharply, stepping between the men and the family. So you'd better leave. When the men left, Isabel was visibly trembling. Carmen, this is getting dangerous. I can't put Lucia at risk. Isabel, darling, do you really think these people appeared because your case isn't important? On the contrary, they appeared because your case is so important that someone is willing to pay a lot of money to silence you. That same evening, Doña Carmen did something that completely changed the course of events. She called her nephew, Miguel, an investigative journalist working for El País in Madrid. Miguel, I need you to come to Seville urgently. I have a story that will interest you. Miguel Hernandez was 35 years old. He had a solid reputation in investigative journalism and a particular intolerance for abuses of power. Upon hearing from his aunt on the phone about the threats against Isabel and Lucia, he took the first train from Madrid. Aunt, this goes far beyond a typical labor case, he said after hearing the whole story. This is a network of systemic corruption, and someone is very scared to resort to physical threats. Over the next 2 days, Miguel conducted a discreet investigation. He used his connections in the judicial system, spoke with current and former employees of various private schools, and began to build connections that even Isabel was unaware of. What he discovered shocked him. Eduardo Herrera was not just the director of a corrupt school. He was the center of a network connecting 6 private educational institutions in Andalusia. All of them operated under the same labor exploitation scheme. More importantly, these institutions had multi-million euro contracts with the Andalusian government to implement special educational programs. The contracts were renewed annually without any transparent bidding procedures. Isabel, Miguel said on Friday afternoon, showing her documents obtained through public information requests. Your case is not just an unfair dismissal. It's fraud against the state, administrative corruption, and a network of influence involving local politicians. And what does that mean for us? It means Lucia has uncovered not just the injustice done to you. She has exposed an entire system that has been stealing public money for years by exploiting workers like you. This revelation came just as Eduardo Herrera was preparing his final blow against the Morena family. On Saturday morning, an anonymous report was filed with social services, claiming that Isabel was an irresponsible mother who was exposing her minor daughter to dangerous situations for personal gain. The report included photographs of Lucia entering the courthouse, newspaper clippings, and testimonies from concerned neighbors claiming the girl showed signs of psychological manipulation. The procedure began immediately. On Sunday morning, a social worker arrived at Isabel's home with a warrant to assess Lucia's living conditions and determine if protective measures were needed. Señora Morena, I'm here because we received a troubling report about your daughter's well-being. Isabel felt the ground give way beneath her feet. What reports? Who said this? I cannot disclose sources, but I need to ask you some questions and inspect the living conditions. Lucia, who was playing in her room, curiously came out to the living room. Who is it, Auntie? Mom! Hello, Lucia. I'm Carmen, but not the Doña Carmen you know. I work with children and I've come to talk to you. Over the next hour, the social worker asked questions that felt like knives to Isabel's heart. Was Lucia missing school because of the court case? Was she showing signs of stress or strange behavior? Was Isabel pressuring her daughter to lie or exaggerate the situation at school? But it was Lucia, with her honesty, who gave answers that reassured the social worker. Mom never told me what to say in court. I investigated everything myself because I saw her crying at night. And I'm not sad that I went to court. I'm proud because I helped my mom and other moms too. Do you feel like mom is forcing you to do things you don't want to do? Number mom always says that if I don't want to do something, I don't have to, but I wanted to help. By the end of the inspection, Carmen, the social worker, had a very different opinion than she had expected. Senora Morena, I see no evidence of neglect or manipulation. Your daughter is a bright, confident girl who is clearly loved. However, I am obligated to warn you that similar complaints may recur. I recommend you document all activities related to Lucia. After the social worker left, Isabel sat on the sofa in her small living room and literally collapsed from exhaustion. Mom, why did that aunt ask if you were forcing me to do something? Lucia asked, snuggling up to her. Because there are people who want to separate us, Sunshine. They want us to stop fighting for justice. Will they succeed? Isabel looked at her daughter, this little 8-year-old warrior who had shown more courage than many adults she knew. No, my love, they won't. But even as she said these words, Isabel knew they were entering the most dangerous phase of their struggle. Eduardo Herrera had shown he was willing to use any means, no matter how low. And she was just a simple worker with a small daughter, challenging a system designed to protect the powerful. What Isabel didn't know was that while she was struggling with despair, allies had already begun to act. Miguel published his preliminary investigations in El País under the headline, "The Hidden Network Behind the Little Lawyers Case." The article detailed the connections between private schools, suspicious government contracts, and a labor exploitation scheme repeated in multiple institutions. Andalusia's Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office launched an official investigation based on Miguel's report, and something even more important. Employees from the 6 schools involved in this network began to contact labor lawyers, inspired by the courage of Isabel and Lucia. But perhaps most significant was what was happening on the streets of Seville. A mother named Rosa, whose daughter attended San Patricio School, organized a meeting at her home on Sunday evening. She invited other mothers who had similar experiences with elite private schools. 20 women showed up, each with her own story of mistreated employees, inflated service fees, and an educational system that seemed designed more to enrich administrators than to educate children. "This little girl did what none of us dared to do," said Rosa. "She challenged the system, and now it's our turn to support her." By the end of the meeting, they decided to create an association, Mothers for Transparency in Education, with the goal of investigating and exposing irregularities in private educational institutions. Meanwhile, in his office, Eduardo Herrera was receiving increasingly alarming news. 3 parents had withdrawn their children from the school. 2 employees resigned, citing irreconcilable differences with management.